I couldn't be sure, but I updated everything. Chatting with yes looks good too. So, how are you doing, Internet? I'm Beanuts. Welcome to the stream. Good afternoon. This is not gaming, at least so far, but I wanted to do this because it is the 110th anniversary of when the Titanic went down, and I wanted to do something for it, and I've got some things that I want to show off as well. So, 112 years ago, April 14th, 1912. That's when the RMS Titanic went down, taking with her over 1,500 people, an extremely tragic loss. And there were many things that led up to that moment, that tragedy. And there was also great glory. And because of the entire fascination that took hold, and it took hold very quickly, people became fascinated, almost obsessed with the story of the Titanic, the loss. And there were stories that were created as well in the media, trying to find who was at fault for it all. And the owner of the White Star Line, J. Bruce Ismay, took a lot of fire, mostly because of one of the people working in the news there basically had it in for him. And the depiction of Ismay, unfortunately, as a villain stuck. In almost every depiction, he is shown as conniving, greedy. He pushes for Titanic to be speeding at full speed through the ice field. They didn't even really know they were in an ice field. There were a whole bunch of different factors that came into play in the loss, but there was this whole thing. And so it's not a simple matter to discuss the Titanic and the loss and to point fingers. If anything, you can't really point fingers at any one person, with a ton of really small, tiny factors that came together into this perfect tragedy, really. So, yeah, I wanted to do that before we got into the bulk of what I wanted to do, which is a review of classic models, a bunch of ocean liners that I have. But to do that, you also have to discuss what ocean liners are, why they're so important, what makes them different from other things, what makes a liner. And uh, really, if you want a ton of information about ocean liners in general and Titanic specifically, I would really recommend the channel Ocean Liner Designs because Mike Brady does a ton of good work on it. And he's worked with these people at Titanic Honor and Glory who made this video so that you can see all of this. And you can also see here in this video one of the big things that defines an ocean liner. Well, define pretty much anything. So here we're looking at and we're defining ocean liners, cruise ships, and airliners too. Because a liner is basically any vehicle that will go along a reliable route or line on a reliable schedule. And to do that, they have to be built basically specifically to endure whatever conditions they might encounter. So for airliners, that means in the air, they need to be able to withstand turbulence and storms, any kind of storm that they can encounter in that. Same too with ocean liners, they have to be able to weather a lot of storms, some massive waves, waves, any of those conditions. They're expected to go through most of that instead of around. But there are some weather which ocean liners cannot withstand, and they have to divert around the worst of, say, what the Atlantic Ocean can throw at them. So, there's that they also have to consider. Ocean liners, cruise ships, airliners, all these transportation, all the cargo ships, they're all purpose-built specifically for the purpose that they're built. It should be obvious, but that is the way that it is. And so you have to take that into account, that one is not better than the other, but they are the best at what they are designed to do. So there's all of that you really have to recognize, that when it comes to their design and execution, they're engineered almost perfectly that way. And so, whereas a cruise ship, they're designed to wander up and down coast. Mostly they're close to coast, so they don't have to deal with that much inclement weather. And they're permitted to divert even by a certain amount of distance to go around storms without even having to ask permission from their parent company or anyone else. They can just do it on their own and not bother anyone. At the same time, cruise ships, they're built wide, long, they have shallow drafts, so the hull doesn't go down very much, because they don't really have to, because they're staying mostly where it's safe. The only exception then is when they take on repositioning cruises and then they cross oceans, but they're still allowed to divert if they have to in order to remain safe. And really, I do hope that they do whenever they do that. And they do these repositioning cruises so that they can serve different areas, and they can offer different cruising experiences to the customers, which is always a wise decision. And cruising really is not as new as you might think it would be. It was recognized, I think, by the Norddeutscher Line system, which is a German shipping company, the one that made the Kaiser Wilhelm der Grosse and the rest of that class. They recognized that they could earn some additional money by sending some of their secondary ships on cruises. And so they started to offer that. But it really became mainstream during American Prohibition, because that was when you had people looking for cruises or the ships as a destination. Uh, they wanted to drink, so they would go out into international waters in order to drink, and uh, crossing the Atlantic and going on an ocean liner was more of a classy experience, but they started to do these shorter cruises to be able to drink and relax, and therefore the experience of being on the ship became the destination rather than just the journey. Whereas in a classic journey, you're going across the Atlantic, you're going from point A to point B, so you're being transported. So ocean liners are more like Greyhound buses. No, they take you places, but they do it in comfort, no, and safety, and they do it relatively fast. And you can see in this shot of the Titanic that if you're actually looking at the structure here, you have a long stretch here in the bow and a long stretch here in the stern where there isn't any built up passenger space. And that's on purpose. That's so that they can take on waves without that much damage or that much risk to the passengers. The crews generally don't really make a big deal if passengers go into these spaces, like in the James Cameron movie, where Jack goes up here and he goes up here with Rose. They wouldn't have really freaked out about that, especially when it was calm out. But if it was stormy, they would have gotten all of the passengers into the superstructure here, into where they have spaces for them to be. But that was so that the ship could take the waves and divert it back out into the ocean without there being too much damage. And I say too much because you have the occasional rogue wave too. And Lusitania and the Michelangelo suffered some significant damage from rogue waves, and you should really look into that because it isn't interesting, and it really shows the power of the ocean. But in one of those two instances, I forget exactly which, the helmsman found himself sitting at the back wall of the wheelhouse, holding the wheel in his hand, completely disconnected from the rest of it, and the windows were all blown out. So that's a lot of damage that a ship can take. A cruise ship, by contrast, can have passenger spaces. Most of them have it like almost here or here around. Some of them have it all the way up to the front and also all the way to the back in order to accommodate more passengers. And they can do that because it's perfectly safe for them. The other difference then is that the hulls are literally thicker because it's built to withstand that sort of thing. So those are some relatively quick differences that I wanted to cover first and foremost before I went into the models. So now we can come over here. And I can actually get into showing you the models that I have. And I got most of them off of Etsy. Most of them are 3D printed, and I will point those out to you as we go. Right. Here behind me, and they're mostly in 12-inch scale. So here we go. This is the SS Great Eastern. Like I said before, it's 12-inch. This is a more detailed model. One of the more recent ones, which the seller made. Unfortunately, he seems to have closed up his shop. I don't know why. I hope it's nothing bad. I hope he didn't get into trouble. But here is the SS Great Eastern. And you can see it has lots of very nice detail on it. You can see that it's propelled by 2 paddle wheels. It also had a propeller at the stern, and you can see the lifeboats were all out past the hull. And it also had a number of masts as well as 5 funnels, which got apparently reduced down to 4 later on. Interestingly, it could not deploy its sails and use its engines at the same time. If it tried to do that, the heat would cause the sails to burn. And of course, you don't want that. So let's go to the wiki for some facts on the Great Eastern. Wants to reload. So it was made of iron, and I pointed to the propulsion already. It was the largest ship ever built at the time of her 1858 launch. The capacity to carry 4,000 passengers, and she was going to usually do the England to Australia route without refueling, but was later used on the Southampton to America, I believe. She was the longest and the biggest vessel until the RMS Oceanic in 1901, as well as the RMS Celtic, which was one of White Star's big 4. I should read this more directly, actually. So, SS Great Eastern was 692 feet or 211 meters long, surpassed next in 1899 by the 705 foot or 215 meter long RMS Oceanic, which also did 17,274 gross tons. It didn't say there. And then as to the passenger capacity, it was surpassed in 1913 by the SS Imperator, which is one of Albert Bullen's 3, which could carry 4,234 passengers. So it was very impressive, not only for that time, but also for afterwards. So generally speaking, the SS Great Eastern was ordered in 1853, in service starting in 1859, and scrapped between 1889 and 1890. The tonnage was 18,915 gross registered tons, displacement 32,160 tons, length 692 feet or 211 meters, as I said, beam, which is this across, was 82 feet or 25 meters. She had 4 decks. And her service speed was 14 knots or 26 kilometers per hour or 16 miles per hour. It had 18 lifeboats, and after 1860, this was increased to 20. And besides the passenger capacity of 4,000, a complement of 418. So that is the Great Eastern. And I think this is a very nice model. Although I don't think the funnels really were colored like that. It's just a factor of how it was printed. And the mass on these things you have to put in. You can see this one is kind of loose. I can take it up and down a bit. But I like that they're included. You can also see that this ship doesn't have much or anything in the way of a superstructure because of the way it was built. But it is an extremely nice model. I like it. and the colors on it are very sharp. That is the Great Eastern. I should call up the information on the next ship that I have first before I pick it up. Next one. I'm going to pick it up without doing anything to it. So here is the Cunard Line's RMS Carpathia. This is generally an unremarkable ship, apart from the fact that she was the one who came in and rescued the Titanic survivors. You can see one funnel. This is, I believe, again, it might not be, but I was pretty sure, oops, that this was another one that I had ordered from the same seller, but it doesn't say on the bottom. I'm pretty sure it is, though. And unlike the model of the Great Eastern that I showed you, this is the less detailed version. So there was a more detailed version that would have the wooden decks on it. See if I can get the details on it for you on the deck. And you can see how much larger the lifeboats appear because this is a smaller ship. If that will avoid blooming. Yeah. So you can see, in contrast to the SS Great Eastern, that this does have a superstructure that's the built-up parts above the boat deck, which this is the boat deck, this is the superstructure. And at first, I was under the impression that it had a double bridge, but this is a boathouse for the crew, as is this at the stern. So it actually has two boathouses for the crew. And then this, as usual, is the bridge. I don't know if turning off the light makes it better, maybe, or easier to see. Anyway, let's get some facts on the Carpathia, shall we? So it's named for the Carpathian mountain range. As I said, it's by Cunard Line, or it was. It mostly did the transatlantic Liverpool, Queenstown, Boston route, and later transferred to Liverpool, Queenstown, New York summers, and Tres Fiume, New York winters. So it did 3 different routes later on. Its yard number was 274, laid down in 1901, launched in 1902, completed in 1903, and its maiden voyage was May 5th, 1903. It was in service from then until 1918, and it was sunk by U-55 on July 17th, 1918, after being hit by 3 torpedoes. Its gross tonnage was 13,603, length 558 feet, beam of 64 feet, 6 inches, or 19.66 meters. Its draft was 34 feet 7 inches, crossing down. The beam across, draft I believe is down. It had 7 decks. For propulsion, it used quadruple expansion steam engines and had twin propellers. You can see the propeller shafts over here. Its speed was mostly 15.5 knots. The planned trial speed of and then surface speed was 14 knots. However, when it went to rescue the Titanic survivors, I think it did about 20, but that also meant that it did permanent damage to its engine, I believe. Engine, boilers, something like that. So during World War One, she couldn't go the same speed anymore. Capacity was of 1,074 passengers, 100 in first class, 200 in second, 2,250 in third class, after 1905, where the total capacity was 2,550. So, that's rather interesting. But, no, this was a ship that was not particularly fast or big. It'd be more for immigrant travelers, but it was more fuel efficient, and it was definitely popular, especially after pulling off a hero move. So that is, again, one of the other ship models. It's, like I said, not as detailed, but it's still very good, and I definitely wanted a representation of the Titanic hero ship. So I also want more. I'd like to have a model of Adriatic, the Kaiser Wilhelm de Gross, and many others. But no, that'll likely happen when I find them. Right, there we go. I have to make sure that it's the right one since there were more ships of the name. So next we have the RMS Mauritania in its 1933 colors and configuration. So it's not the standard colors nor what it started with. And it's supposed to have come with propellers as well because it's the more detailed version. But I never received those, unfortunately. So you can see it has a built-up boat deck on the aft as well. Trying to get some details there. Kind of going backwards, but okay. And I like the details on this, both on the side and front. And you can see the red in the vents as well. As well as the portholes on the side too. That's fun. Trying to get it on frame, but in a way that I can kind of rest my hand. Oop. So let's get some facts while we're looking at the Mori. I want to put this kind of like that. My forehead behind that. I don't really like that. Manipulating an object in front of the camera and trying to show it is kind of tricky. Anyway, RMS Mauritania was the sister ship of the Lusitania, and she was the world's largest ship until the RMS Olympic. She captured the eastbound Blue Ribbon for fastest crossing on the maiden return voyage in December 1907 and claimed westbound during her 1909 season and held both speed records for 20 years. As Cunard tends to do, it's named for the ancient Roman province of Mauritania rather than the modern Mauritania to the south, which is kind of interesting. The Lusitania is also named similarly. And because of the later merger between Cunard and White Star, Cunard White Star Line is listed as one of their owners. So that's also kind of interesting. So she did the Liverpool, Queenstown, New York route between 1907 and 1919, then the Southampton, Cherbourg, New York route from 1919 until 1934. It was ordered in 1904, response to the Kaiser class, by the way, and laid down, then launched on September 20th, 1906, and christened by the Duchess of Roxburgh. In her maiden voyage was November 16th, 1907, in service until 1934, when she was scrapped in 1935 at Rosyth, Scotland, actually beside the Olympic. Her tonnage was 31,938 and displaced 44,610 tons. The length of this thing is 790 feet or 240.8 meters beam. This 88 meters, draft 88 feet, 26.8 meters, draft 33 feet or 10.1 meters, depth 33 feet 6 inches, so pretty close, and had 8 decks. Her power was supplied by direct action Parsons steam turbines to high pressure to low pressure. So you had 4 Parsons steam turbines, each one supplying power to one of the 4 propellers. And had a speed of 25 knots, or 20, and that's 46 kilometers per hour, 29 miles per hour, and a design speed of 28 knots, or 52 kilometers per hour and 32 miles per hour. Her capacity was 2,164, so 563 in first class, 464 in second, and 1,138 in third. Crew capacity of 802, and she was the largest ship in the world from 1907 until 1910. It was running mates to both the Lusitania until she was sunk, and the Aquitania, her younger half-sister. I do want a model of the Aquitania as well. Aquitania is more as a response to the Olympic class, is something of a cross between the Lucy and the Olympic classes, so it's much bigger. And interestingly enough, and funnily enough, the Lusitania class is actually one of the only 4 funnelers to actually use all 4 funnels for ventilation and such. Well, from the steam engines specifically. And you can see that despite that, the deck was pretty much littered with vents anyway, because it still needed them. So, I like this model. It's one of my favorites, and if I was living back in the day, I would have sailed aboard the Mauritania without any hesitation. And I like pretty much all of her design, and especially the curved bridge. So once we get past the Maury, we have to go to something which you might more typically think of if and when you think of ocean liners. Sort of. This should look familiar based on what you were looking at before, although it is a less detailed model. This is RMS Olympic, by the way, not the Titanic. Olympic was the oldest sister, the first one to come out. So they are nearly identical. There are some key differences between them. And I'll probably have to bring that back later for a comparison as well. But I can point out some of the things right now so that you can spot the differences when I bring it back. So one of the differences was the placement of the bell. And I think this is actually the lookout here on the map, the mast, but I kind of put it there to mark it as well. So that would have actually faced forward. The bell was backwards on the Olympic. It was forward on the Titanic and to one of the sides on the Britannic. The bridge wings originally were flush with the hull, but on the Titanic and later after a refit, they extended it somewhat so that bridge crew could get a better view of the ship astern, as well around the first lifeboats that were tied in on the ship, just for that better view. Another difference is that they had the A deck promenade and then they had the B deck promenade. The B deck promenade on the Olympic was completely open to the elements, but it wasn't very popular. People preferred the A deck promenade to the B because it was less exposed and I guess you could say less wet. So on the Titanic, Thomas Andrews and J. Bruce Ismay decided that it would be a better use of space to bring more passenger space forward. So there's cabins, dining halls, then the Café Parisien and the a la carte restaurant all taking up more of the space. And then there's a promenade, so and it more covered. So they used more of the space there on Titanic as well. That design was carried forward on the Britannic, and after refit, it was used on Olympic as well. So a much more popular design. Get some facts. And if you ever wondered what the Titanic coming straight at you would look like, it's kind of like that. Or going away. So, Olympic herself was used on the Southampton, Cherbourg, and Queenstown, New York routes, built by Harland and Wolff in Belfast, and they were very proud of that. Oh, they have the cost here for 7.5 million USD. Yard number 400, way number 347. Laid down in 1908, launched in 1910, maiden voyage June 14th, 1911, and in service until April 12th, 1935. Let's see where it might mention. I guess not just then. Okay, more stats. Her tonnage was 45,324 gross registered tons and 46,358 after 1913, then 46,439, so just a bit more after 1920. She displaced 52,067 tons at a length of 882 feet 9 inches, or 269.1 meters, a beam of 92 feet 9 inches, or 28.3 meters, a height of 175 feet, or 53.4 meters, from keel to the top of the funnels. You had 9 decks, 8 for passengers, 1 for the crew. For power, you had 24 double-ended 6 banks of furnaces and 5 single-ended 3 furnaces, Scotch boilers, which originally burned coal, later converted to oil in 1919. She had 2 4-cylinder triple expansion reciprocating engines, producing 15,000 horsepower each for the 2 outboard wing propellers. That's these guys. At 85 revolutions per minute, 1 low-pressure turbine producing 16,000 horsepower, but capable of 59,000 horsepower at full speed for the central prop. I don't know if I got all of that on the screen. Yes, I did. And that is 2 bronze 3-bladed wing propellers, 1 bronze 4-bladed for the center from 1911 to 13, and then 1 bronze 3-bladed center propeller 1914 to 1935, apparently. Well, they were trying different propeller settings between Olympic and Titanic, but they really couldn't get the results from the Titanic because she sunk. At a speed of 21 knots in 1911, that's 39 kilometers per hour, 24 miles per hour, and 23 knots, or 43 kilometers per hour, 26 miles per hour in 1933. And then a max speed of 24.2 knots, or 45 kilometers per hour, and 28 miles per hour. Capacity passenger was 2,435 and had a crew of 950. That probably includes the all the cooking staff and the radio staff as well. What's interesting as well is that when you look at pictures of her pictures of Titanic and Olympic side by side, if I bring this up, yeah, you will see that the Olympic is here painted of white or gray to make it stand out, and that was a White Star tradition. So here's the Olympic in white. Here's the Titanic being built just beside her. Unfortunately, Olympic over here was involved in a couple of accidents. Her first major accident was a collision with the RMS Hawk, which damaged part of her hull plating as well as one of the propeller shafts, which needed to be replaced. And White Star Line was found as responsible, so they had to pay for damages on both ends. In order to get the Olympic back into service as fast as they possibly could, they took the parts from the Titanic and put her on the Olympic to get her back in service, which delayed the Titanic's initial launch. Then there was a later incident where Olympic threw a propeller, and they had to replace that as well, again, delaying the launch even further of the Titanic. And that's important because after Titanic launched, at the time it was warmer, the ice flows were going further south, and so it went into that ice field and had its fateful encounter, which is definitely unfortunate. Instead of putting this back here, I'm going to put that down for a moment. Back in, please. Wonder why it's... There we go. Now, when Olympic was nearing completion, J. Bruce Ismay decided to alter the route that the Olympic class would be taking, and he added Cherbourg as a port. But the port of Cherbourg, the harbor, was not large enough to be able to fully service the Olympic class. So they determined that they would have to use some tenders in order to get the passengers to the Olympic and Titanic and later the Britannic. However, White Star Line's tenders were badly out of date, and Ismay decided that they needed to update it and make it part of the whole Olympic class experience. He therefore had Thomas Andrews undertake to build 2 tenders that were basically miniaturized Olympic class ships. The first, the Nomadic, ta-da, would service the first class passengers only. And so it would have a miniaturized version of the first class service, just to take these passengers over to the ship. The second ship, the Traffic, would service second and third class passengers, but other than the interiors reflecting that, would basically be the same as her sister tender. And so Thomas Andrews, he did the design, making it basically a mini this. To position them so that you can see them both at the same time. So basically in miniature. And completed both the Traffic and the Nomadic because they would have to be in service when the Olympic arrived at Cherbourg so that it could be used right away, or they could both be used right away. And they actually did it, launching both the Nomadic and Traffic at the same time so that they would be there when they were needed. And when the First World War started, Nomadic was used mostly in evacuation of Cherbourg, but Traffic got a bit caught up. It was sunk and refloated multiple times by the Germans until it was sunk and unfortunately never recovered. After that, they said it had been through enough. The Nomadic, on the other hand, is one of the only remaining White Star Line vessels, and it's at the Titanic Museum, so you can actually visit the real version of this. So, this is the Nomadic. I think that it's very nice, even though it's not the more detailed version. Now this is going to be a little bit different because this is an actual plastic assembly model of the RMS Titanic. And I think they did a really good job with it. There are some details which are not right, specifically that middle propeller. Some documents were unearthed last year, or they were discovered from Harland and Wolff, which revealed that when Titanic launched, they had been trying a full triple propeller configuration on the Titanic to see whether or not that would be more efficient or faster than having 2 triple-bladed propellers on the outboard and one like that, one quadruple-bladed, which is what the Olympic is most known for. And quite a few, almost all of the pictures that we have that are attributed to the Titanic are actually Olympic. The only ones that we know are specifically of the Titanic are the ones from rooms and facilities that only the Titanic had. However, the Olympic class in general had all of the facilities and the luxuries that had been previously aboard the Big Four, but under a single hull. So that's actually pretty impressive. One of the other things that's impressive is the level of detail and commitment on this thing, because they did not have to make the holes for all of the windows, but they did. And of course, the bronze propellers, the anchors up there. The tiny little stickers, though, gave me quite a bit of trouble on the placement. You can see the Titanic and Southampton there are a little bit crooked, more than a little bit. And the flags on the mast don't want to stay properly. Just like I said, they don't want to stay. Whoops. If I can get that back on. But at least some stickers are included. So on this one, it might include the bell, it might not. On the mast here, wrong one. But you can see the American flag on this forward mast. This would be displaying the destination of the ship. So this was used when they, I think when they left Southampton and when they left Cherbourg. But after that, when it was over open water, they would put the flag away so that it wouldn't get damaged. Then you have the house flag, which is the Red Star Line's flag, up on the rearboard mast. And if you're wondering why they had the mast, other than the lookout post, which would be on them as well, it was to suspend the wireless line between them. And the higher up the line was, the stronger the voice and reception would be on the Marconi wireless. The last flag, which on this displays as Britain's flag, is actually inaccurate. It would have displayed what's called the blue ensign, because there were Navy Reserve officers serving on board, including the captain and his first officer, Murdoch. So that would actually be the blue ensign, which is mostly blue with the Union Jack in a corner. If you're wondering what this thing on here is, that's a stand to support the main anchor, which would be resting on the deck. You also see several hatches and cranes for loading the cargo. And I also like a lot of the other details. I am going to bring that back later in talking about the Britannic. I want to specifically help you to remember that the Olympic launched with 45,324 gross registered tons. Because Titanic had 46,329 gross registered tons as a result of the replacement of the B-deck promenade. That's that was the biggest thing. So some facts on this ship. She was yard number 401, laid down in March 31st, 1909, launched May 31st, 1911. Remember that, because she was then completed April 2nd, 1912, and her maiden voyage began on April 10th. And unfortunately, sank by April 15th. Took about 2 hours, 45 minutes in order to do that, because her crew kept on trying to make her stay afloat for as long as possible. They had closed the watertight doors, of course. They were trying to use the pumps, but the pumps came from the stern, and they had to reopen the doors in order to try to use them. But the engineers kept the light on as long as possible. Harold and Bride, the wireless operators, they'd repaired the wireless earlier, and they kept the Titanic's voice for as long as possible. But it wasn't possible to keep it up forever, and they only had so many lifeboats. The good thing was that they were going down by the head and the watertight compartments, even though they weren't complete, were keeping more or less centered. When a ship is breached on one side, it tends to roll, and that would have led to capsizing. If you want an example of that happening, you can look at the Lusitania. More recent example, of course, you can look at the Costa Concordia. But she was sinking mostly evenly, filling up very gradually because the water was going over compartments before filling the next, and then it would fill up sequentially almost. But there came a time when there was so much water and she was going down so much, it lifted up the stern to about 20 degrees, and the ships were not built to withstand that, not to have the length of the hull out of the water. It put a lot of stress onto the spine of the ship, and because there were a lot of open gaps, like the for the uptake for the funnels and the vents for ventilation down to the boiler rooms. You would have these vents that could open. You had long shafts for the stairways, the staircases, cargo holds. All these gaps were gaps as well in the structural integrity of the ship, but it was never imagined that anything like this would happen, and so she broke. I did mention that the Lusitania class was the only 4-funnel ship to actually use all 4 funnels in order to ventilate the furnaces. But that doesn't mean that the Olympic class weren't using the funnels. They were using them still for ventilation, but for the rear of the ship. They had the ventilation shafts for the boiler rooms I mentioned before. They had electric-powered Scirocco fans, and they had, I forget what they're called now, but they had vents all along on the cowl vents on the deck. And the neat part about the cowl vents that you see all the time, and you saw on the Mauritania as well, they're the curved ones, you could turn them around to face whatever direction they needed to get the wind and ventilation. This funnel wasn't just a dummy. It had ventilation from the first class smoking room. It had ventilation from the galleys, so for cooking, and from the cabins in the aft section of the ship. And engineers loved to use it as a place to take their smoking breaks. So, in a way, it was smoking. I'm going to put that there. And we are going to look at a different... Oh, wait. There is one other thing, because I really should cover it as well. You're wondering where that model came from. I'll need that too. So the model of the Titanic, which I have here, is this multicolored parts. That's what the MCP comes from. 1 to 1000 scale model from Academy Hobby Model Kits. So it's actually very good for an older model, and they didn't have the detail of the propellers, but they designed this pretty well. You can see here how some of the parts came together. You have the details poking up from the bottom usually, and it's a fairly cheap model kit. So if you want a representation of the Titanic, this is probably the best, most affordable ones you can get at a smaller scale. And I got it off of Amazon. Highly, highly recommend. I did not like that. Now this little model comes from the Roller 3D instead of Hive, so it's a different seller. And it is the HMHS Titanic. So she came into service as a hospital ship during the First World War because of some delays on her completion. As you can see, it's smaller than the other models. Here is the Olympic. But ironically, Britannic was the largest of these sisters. She was built larger to accommodate the double hull, whereas Olympic had the double hull added within itself. So it lost some interior space, but it was much safer afterwards. You can also see the derrick-style gantries that were used for getting the lifeboats into position and lowering them, as opposed to the well-installed ones on the previous ships. The biggest advantage of the gantry-style davits is that they could reach across to the other side of the deck, grab a lifeboat, and then put it into position. Downside, though, you can see here, at least one of the gantries was put in place because they were installed in a rush, right in front of a funnel, which would block its reach. The other davits that were installed were the old Welland style, but that was to be able to service the rest of the ship. So the Britannic was built slightly larger to accommodate the double hull walls without losing any of the interior space, making her the largest of the three Olympic class, but still the same class of ship. However, because of the timing of when she came into service, and then she was sunk when she hit a mine, she never got to run in civilian service. However, she was highly successful as a hospital ship, being able to accommodate a lot of wounded, and completed one campaign, was on her way back into service when she hit the mine. So she didn't go down immediately like her older sister did, but still, it was not good. So for those stats, it was laid down on November 30th, 1911, launched February 26, 1914, and completed December 12th, 1915, but was out of service due to the sinking November 21st, 1916. And the mine was set by SMU-73 on November 21st, 1916, near Kea in the Aegean Sea. Her tonnage was 48,158 gross registered tons, and she displaced 43,200 tons. Length of 882 feet, inches, or 269.1 meters overall. Beam of 94 feet, 28.7 meters. Height, 175 feet or 53 meters from the keel to the top of the funnels. Again, and a draft of 34 feet 7 inches, 10.5 meters. Depth of 64 feet 6 inches, 19.7 meters. I'm not sure what the difference there is. We had 9 passenger decks, originally anyway, and much the same, I think, as when it comes to boilers. So 24 double-ended and 5 single-ended coal-fired boilers, 2 4-cylinder triple expansion reciprocating engines, and then 1 low-pressure turbine producing 18,000 horsepower. It was the biggest low-pressure turbine ever built to accommodate the extra size without losing any of the speed. Their speed, speaking of, service speed of 21 knots, 39 kilometers per hour, or 24 miles per hour, and maximum speed of 23 knots, or 43 kilometers per hour, 26 miles per hour. Crew capacity overall of 3,309. And if she had ever come into service as under her White Star Line colors, she would have probably looked a bit like this, as opposed to in these liveries, but she was definitely marked well as a hospital ship. It was even lit up, but mine can't tell the difference. Also, the other detail that I wanted to bring up, I'm not sure if the camera will pick it up quite, but you kind of can see it. Not really as I would have liked, though. Let's see if I... So the structure right there in the middle between those 2 funnels was a platform for the compass to be able to calibrate it with minimal interference, magnetic interference from the metal structures of the ship, including the funnels, which is why it's between 2 of them like that. The funny thing is that this little model has it more detailed than the others. So this one is just a block. You can see that here. It's just a block of plastic. So even though they did a lot of detail in a lot of other parts, it's just a block. And then here it's pretty detailed again. And they probably did it to the right size, more or less. There is a gap in the bottom you can kind of see. You can see it more there. So they got different levels of details on the models, but whether or not you're satisfied with that, I suppose, will depend on what you want out of your plastic models, depending on whether or not you wanted them like this. But I was quite satisfied with this. Oh, by the way, bring this back for a moment, because on the Olympic class, there were 3 places from which to steer the ship. The first, of course, was the bridge. The second was the wheelhouse directly behind the bridge. And then the third was back here, the docking bridge, which was rarely used, if at all. I don't think it was actually used on the Titanic. Olympic maybe. Now, even though I would like to get a model of the Vaterland, which was the second of the Ballon trio, I don't know where I would get it, but I'll keep an eye out. So that was the last of the Edwardian era ocean liner models that I have. Now I need to go to a much more recent specimen. This is, well, a low detailed model of, I'm not sure this will get picked up by the camera, but I will try. Kind of. It's not doing it. Oh, this is the SS Normandy, or a model of it. And it's quite the unusual ship. It was very advanced and cutting edge for its time, which in a way led to some passengers or potential passengers being scared of her. But it is a very interesting ship. It has an unfortunate story. And you can see even its stern was quite unique for it. And this was again by the same modeler as did the Carpathia and the Great Eastern. Let's get us some facts, shall we? The Normandy was built in France for the French line Compagnie Générale Transatlantique, or CGT, entered service in 1935 as the largest and fastest passenger ship afloat, crossing the Atlantic in a record 4.14 days. Remains one of the most powerful steam turbo-electric propelled passenger ship ever. Her novel design and lavish interiors led many to consider her the greatest of ocean liners, and would heavily influence the French arm of the steamline modern design movement. Not a commercial success and relied partly on government subsidy to operate. She made 139 westbound transatlantic crossings from her home port of Le Havre to New York City. She held the blue ribbon for the fastest transatlantic crossing at several points during her career, during which the RMS Queen Mary was her main rival. During the Second World War, Normandy was seized by U.S. authorities at New York, renamed USS Lafayette in 1942 while being converted to a troop ship. She caught fire. During the conversion process, the fire suppression system was disabled so they could do the work. Someone left a stack of highly flammable life vests out near where they were working. That caught fire. The fire spread. The New York Fire Department mainly tried to douse it with fire from the river without doing much else and lost the battle. Not only that, the extra water caused her to capsize, and she was scrapped where she lay. And sold for a pittance to add insult to injury. Come on. The New York Fire Department, anyone wouldn't let the crew in, wouldn't listen to the advice of her builder because her builder was Russian. And all of that is a damned shame because it was a great ship. And it would have been great to see her have a full career and be competition for the Queen Mary, you know? Because competition pushes people. Let's see if it says... Yes. So the designer behind the Normandy was Vladimir Yurkovich. He was a former ship architect for the Imperial Russian Navy. He emigrated to France after the 1917 revolution. and his ideas included a slanted clipper-like bow, a bulbous forefoot beneath the waterline in combination with a slim hydrodynamic hull. He managed to convince the French engineers to ask him to join their project. He also approached Cunard with his ideas, but was rejected because the bow was deemed too radical. Well, I guess for that time, but they definitely worked on it later on. The Normandy was laid down January 26, 1931, launched on the 29th of 1932, also October, when she was christened, completed in 1933, and her maiden voyage was May 29, 1935. In service until 1942, unfortunately caught fire and capsized, and then scrapped in October 1946. The tonnage was 79,280 gross registered tons until 1936, and afterwards was increased to 83,423. She displaced 68,350 tons fully loaded, at a length of 313.6 meters, or 1,029 feet. Before certain point, I guess, because there's a second factor that says 293.2 meters. Her beam was 35.9 meters, or 117 feet 10 inches. Her height, quite tall, 56.1 meters, or 184 feet. Her draft, this below the waterline, was 11.2 meters, or 36 feet 7 inches loaded, and depth of 28 meters, 92 feet, to promenade, or the strength deck. She had 12 decks, 4 turboelectric engines, for a total of 160,000 horsepower, with a maximum apparently of 200,000. She had 4 three-bladed on launch later 4 propellers, and a speed of 29.5 knots, or 54.6 kilometers per hour, 33.9 miles per hour, as designed, and a top speed of 32.2 knots, 59.6 kilometers per hour, 37.1 miles per hour, recorded during her trials. She had a capacity of 1,972, that's 848 in first class, or cabin, 670 tourist class, 454 third class, crew of 1,345. Quite the impressive ship. It's extremely unfortunate that she went down. Like I said, I would have loved to see this have a full career. Unfortunately, that was not to be, but I like this model. It does seem a little hard to recognize what things are, especially on the foredeck here. But like I mentioned before, the forward of the deck was designed to be able to take waves without damage or affecting the passengers. So this whole area is both cabin for cargo loading, and then this is to take water. This is a complete water break, and then the next part, the water would clash against this part of the forward part, which did have some spaces that passengers as well as crew could use, as well as the bridge. And you can see the bridge wings are quite flat and long, and she had her name there. It looks to me like all of the funnels were functional. One of these ships had kennels inside of a third fake funnel, but I forget which one it was. And you can see the unique stern right here, as well as where the propellers would have mounted. Well, that is the Normandy, and I'm glad to have a representation of her, although I kind of wish I had a more detailed version. For this, I'm going to need two. Oh, one page, but still kind of two. So this is going to allow me to compare two different sort of things. And I do have to admit that the first one I got was damaged. I tried my best to do some repairs with glue. If you see something off, that explains why. This is RMS Queen Mary. This is the less detailed one. And this is the detailed one. So, same basic stuff, but you can see that there are details here that you can pick up much more easily on the more detailed version than you can on the less detailed version. And I'm going to hold those in turn as I go through this. So first, show you this. As I said before, this was the main competition for the Normandy. And she's now a hotel. Was it Long Beach? But that's okay. My nephew has suggested that I try cutting away the third funnel, make it into the Queen Elizabeth. Although I think the QE was a bit different. It's something that I could do. And it is interesting that he made the tops of some of those lifeboats red. My nephew, who knows more about these things than I do, said that that's not the case on the real thing. I'm pretty sure, though, that when you 3D print, some of the colors will come through at different points, whether or not you planned it to. So let's go and look at some QM facts. Well, she's now retired. Sailed primarily on the North Atlantic Ocean from 1936 to 1967 for Cunard, built by John Brown and Company in Clydebank, Scotland. Queen Mary, along with Queen Elizabeth, part of Cunard's planned two-ship weekly express service between Southampton, Cherbourg, and New York. Two ships were a British response to the express superliners built by Germany, Italy, and French companies in the late 1920s, early 1930s. The Queen Mary won the Blue Ribbons on her after her maiden voyage in August of 1936, lost the title to the SS Normandy in 1937, recaptured it in 1938, holding it until 1952, when she was taken by the new SS United States. During World War II, she was converted into trooper ship and ferried Allied soldiers during the conflict. On one voyage in 1943, she carried over 16,600 people, and that's the still standing record for the most people on a vessel. Oh, yes, and she was known as the Grey Ghost, and, right. Yes, she was. And Hitler put a bounty on her. She was never sunk, though. But jet engines, or not jet engines, jetliners came along, and ocean liners couldn't really compete with that sort of speed. So they had to come up with other uses for great ships like this. So some facts. So from 1936 until 1949, she was owned by Cunard White Star after they converted and then or merged, and 1949 to 67 by Cunard after they got rid of the White Star from the name. and currently she's owned by the city of Long Beach. It was ordered on April 3rd, 1929, built again by the John Brown and Company in Clydebank, Scotland, yard number 534, laid down in December 1st, 1930, launched September 26, 1934, sponsored by Queen Mary herself, christened September 26, 1934, and her maiden voyage was in May 27th, 1936. And in service from 1936 until 1969. And she's currently a ship, hotel, and museum docked in Long Beach. Her tonnage was 80,774 in 1936 and 81,237 in 1947. She displaced 77,400 long tons for 78,642 metric tons. Her length was 1,019.4 feet, or 310.7 meters. LEO, length overall, is a length at waterline of 1,004 feet, and length between perpendiculars, at the less, so that depends on where you're measuring on the hull, of 965 feet. Her beam was 118 feet across, height 181 feet, draft of 38 feet 9 inches, and she had 12 decks. She had 24 Yarrow boilers and powered by 4 Parsons single reduction geared steam engines with 4 shafts. You can see the 4 there. She had a surface speed of 28.5 knots, or 52.8 kilometers per hour, 32.8 miles per hour. And that's not a maximum. I guess when she pushed slightly, she could do 32.84 knots, or 60.82 kilometers per hour, 37.79 miles per hour. And that speed was achieved during her trial, so I guess that was her maximum. Her capacity was 2,140 passengers. That's 776 in first or cabin class, 785 in cabin or tourist class, post, I guess, they renovated, and 579 in tourist or third class, and she had a crew of 110. But the rooms would be somewhat different as a hotel, as you could probably surmise. It has been noted in video that another creator made about the Queen Mary that she's just about the only ship that had a dedicated room for a synagogue for Jews to pray, as opposed to probably had a normal chapel as well for the rest of passengers and crew. This one was the only one to have a synagogue, oddly enough. Cunard felt like they had a connection with the Jewish community, and they had to recognize that. There's also a story in some of the early days of the Second World War of a Jewish family running from the Germans. They get stopped by German police at the border, German guards, and they're made to run after the train. At the next town, the father of the family calls the Cunard office, asking if they can delay departure of the Queen Mary, even though he knows that the policy is not to delay. Keep this in mind if you're on a cruise ship or an ocean liner and you're at a stop. They will not delay usually. And he had to hope, but he didn't have a whole lot of hope that the Queen Mary would stick around. The captain had its orders. When they arrived at Southampton, the ship was still there, and they were very thankful. And as soon as the ship left port, that's when the family started to feel safe and human again. So the Jewish community has a special connection with the RMS Queen Mary in particular. But I just like this model, and I like the way that the details are picked out. And again, you can see red inside of the vents here that are all along. So that's color that's coming in from inside of the model as it's 3D printed. I also want to take a comparison in the funnel placements between the Normandy and the Queen Mary. It may not be so obvious, but it should be. That's the Queen Mary on top, the Normandy on bottom. So there's more space between the funnels on the Normandy than there are on the Queen Mary. And Albert Ballin did this on his 3 ships. On the Imperator, the Vaterland, and the Bismarck. And the reason he did that was so that there was more uninterrupted passenger space on the inside. And he also had one other quirk hidden inside of the second and third ship, and that was that instead of going straight up, he had the funnel intakes, which connect the boilers to the funnels, or uptakes. He had them split and then go up the sides of the hulls and then join near the top underneath the funnels. So again, you have more uninterrupted space on the interior, and the decorator could do more with that interior space. My second to last model then is another less detailed model. This is the SS United States, and this is my favorite of the ocean liners. Although this should not be blue, the funnel should probably be wider, but I think it's a good representation. The bridge wing did come damaged, but I glued it back on successfully. And this is my favorite of the ocean liners because it has an extremely sleek design, and it is the fastest ocean liner, fastest passenger ship ever built, even to this day. Though that also speaks to the fact that passenger ships have not been built for speed as much as this has. So the fact that she still has the blue ribbon, technically, because even though they're a faster ship, it wasn't a passenger ship, it wasn't doing a regular route, doesn't do regular service. So United States still has that record. And I do like that quite a bit. You can see the angular bow, and see it's got a very narrow profile to cut through the water. And all of that is definitely on purpose. The United States is an extremely over-engineered monster of a ship, okay? So let's see. It was built between 1950 and 1951 for the United States line. It was the largest ocean liner constructed entirely in the United States, the fastest ocean liner to cross the Atlantic in either direction, retaining the blue ribbon. It was designed by the American naval architect William Francis Gibbs and his brother, and could be converted into a troop ship if required by the Navy at the time of war. It maintained an uninterrupted schedule of transatlantic passenger service until 1969. Was never used for military application. built at the wrong time. She'd been sold several times since the 1970s. Each new owner tried unsuccessfully to make the liner profitable. Eventually, the ship's fittings were sold at auction, and hazardous wastes, including asbestos panels used throughout the ship for fire safety, were removed, leaving her almost completely stripped in 1994. Then 2 years later, she was towed to Philadelphia, where she still is. There's a preservation group, SS United States Conservancy, been raising funds to save the ship. She might get evicted, though, from the city. The group purchased her in 2011, drawn up several unrealized plans to restore the ship, which included turning the ship into a multi-purpose waterfront complex. In 2015, as its funds dwindled, the group began accepting bids to scrap the ship. However, sufficient donations came in via extended fundraising. Large donations have kept the ship berthed at her Philadelphia dock, while the group continues to further investigate restoration plans. I really do hope that they restore her. Maybe they could use her as a hotel, just like the Queen Mary. It would be a shame for this to be scrapped. Like I said, she was built for the United States line, with her port of registry being New York. She was ordered in 1949. The builder was Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company. It had a cost of $79.4 million, or that's worth $748 million in 2023. Her hull number was 488. It was laid down in February 8th, 1950, and launched June 23rd, 1951, as well as christened then. Their maiden voyage was July 3rd, 1952, and she was out of service in November 14th, 1969, when she became overcome by jets. The tonnage is 53,292 gross registered tons. She displaced 45,400 tons as designed and 47,264 tons at her maximum. Her length is 990 feet, 302 meters overall, 940 feet or 287 meters at the waterline. Oh, waterline is kind of over here, not down here. Her beam is 101.4 feet or 30.9 meters maximum. Her draft is 31 feet 3 inches or 9.53 meters designed. Her depth is 175 feet 53 meters from the keel to the funnel. Keel on here to the funnel. For that, she had 12 decks, and she had an installed power rating. That's not going to be very meaningful to anyone, or most people. For propulsion, she had 4 Westinghouse double reduced geared steam turbines and 8 Babcock and Wilcox boilers operating at 1000 psi, later reduced to 925 psi, and 975 degrees Fahrenheit, or 524 degrees Celsius, and had 4 shafts for the propellers. Her silver speed was 30 knots, 56 kilometers per hour, 36 miles per hour, and at trials, she did 38.32 knots, or 70.97 kilometers per hour, 44.1 miles per hour in her trials. And it was claimed that she could make 43 knots, or 80 kilometers per hour, 49 miles per hour, although she was never pushed that hard, so we still don't know what speed she could make. Her engines are still intact, however, her propellers have mostly been removed. There's one, if you can visit her, that is, I believe, on the forward deck. The propellers were a closely guarded military secret because it was used by the U.S. Navy as well. It says the interiors were designed by Dorothy Markwald and Anne Urquhart, and they designed the interiors of the SS America as well, which was a smaller but definitely celebrated ship that served very well. It had a modern, fresh, contemporary look, emphasizing simplicity, restrained elegance over glitz and glamour. And it definitely has an image of speed. Does this include who designed the propellers? No, I don't see that there. But it's a very important point that uh, William Francis Gibbs, as he was designing the ship, but before he was designing the ship, because the United States had confiscated the Vaterland, I believe. Again, that's one of the Ballin trio. Yeah, and they used it as a troop ship. And then afterwards, they wanted to get the plans book. Pardon me. Oy. But Germany was under no obligation to give the plans for the ship. At most, they just had to give the ship itself. So America wanted someone to go through the ship and draw up plans based on what was actually there. They hired William Francis Gibbs and his brother to do that. And they did a very good job of it as well. After they went through the ship, they took the secrets, the little tricks that Balin used to create his ship, and they used that to create the SS America and the SS United States. And then, influencing things even further, you had the SS Morro Castle and the SS Normandy both going down in flames. So Gibbs became obsessed with fire safety. There is not a single thing that the United States is built out of that's made out of wood. This is all metal, or was all metal. And for fire safety, as I mentioned, they used asbestos because it was very good at keeping the flames from spreading, until they found out how dangerous asbestos was, and they had to gut the ship because it was everywhere. And that meant that without funding to reconstruct it, it could not be in service, even if it still wanted to go up against jetliners. So that's why she's been laid up ever since. And there's no one who will operate her as an ocean liner currently. So from the profile, the bow, everything else, she's engineered for fire safety and speed most of all, but she was also pretty luxurious in her own way. As I said, the propellers were a closely guarded military secret, and they allowed the all the power from the engines to be converted fully into the blistering speed that she used. This is a representation of the fastest passenger ship ever built. And I like it. Don't know if you can properly see the breakwater there on the bow. And you can kind of see the lifeboats tucked in there as well. There's not a lot of detail on this model. I wish I could have gotten a more detailed version, but at the time when I was ordering this, you didn't have the detailed versions, but that's where that is. I'm going to switch to the page. First, this is my last model. And I will get this. So I built the Revel 1-1200 Queen Mary 2. I would not recommend it to those who would have some issues following some instructions which aren't the most straightforward in the world. If you're used to building gunpla, then some of this will not really make a lot of sense. For example, this is to build the main hull. Get this to stay. So I was looking at this and I was puzzled about how exactly to put in these pieces. You see where the shaded part where it says 3 or where it says 2 in the back. And there's this D-shaped piece here that's white that's supposed to go under. You have the shaded frame and the long slat sides. And it took me a while to figure out how to put those in. I could only do it by trial and error. So it was far from the easiest thing that I've ever built. As constructed, it's definitely a satisfactory representation of the QM2, but it's not the easiest kit. You do have to use plastic cement. Tamiya works on it, and my Gundam markers also work to paint it. If you want a decent, relatively inexpensive representation of QM2, it is good, but it's not going to be the easiest thing to put together. And it may look like something like this once you finish painting it. Again, this is all with my Gundam paint markers. And I haven't put on any of the water slide decals yet. But this is a representation of the Queen Mary 2, or QM2, currently the only ocean liner serving the transatlantic crossing. And so let's take a look at some stats over here, shall we? She's the flagship of the Cunard Line since succeeding the Queen Elizabeth II in 2004. It was officially named QM2 after Queen Elizabeth II by Queen Elizabeth II after the first Queen Mary of 1936. With the retirement of the QE2 in 2008, Queen Mary 2 is the only ocean liner in service in the world, with regular service between Southampton, England, and New York City, New York, and an annual world cruise. It was designed by a team of naval architects led by Stephen Payne, who did a very good job. Constructed in France by Chantiers de l'Antique. Time of construction, QM2 was the longest at 1,131.99 feet, or 345.03 meters, and largest with a gross tonnage of 148,528 GT. Passenger ship ever built. She no longer holds these records after the construction of Royal Caribbean International's Freedom of the Seas, a cruise ship. She is still the largest ocean liner ever built, and she is too long to use the Suez Canal, or the Panama Canal, rather. Let's see, she's intended for regular scheduled crossings of the Atlantic Ocean. The final construction cost was approximately $300,000 per berth. guess that's the rooms. It was increased by the high quality of materials, having been designed as an ocean liner. 40% more steel was required than for a standard cruise ship. Hull is thicker. UM2 has a maximum speed of just over 30 knots, 56 kilometers per hour, 35 miles per hour, and a cruising speed of 26 knots, 48 kilometers per hour, 30 miles per hour. It's faster than a contemporary cruise ship. Instead of common diesel electric, it uses two integrated electric propulsion to achieve her top speed. Diesel engines augmented by gas turbines are used to generate electricity for electric motors for propulsion and onboard use. Her facilities include 15 restaurants and bars, 5 swimming pools, a casino, ballroom, theater, and the first planetarium at sea. She also has a library. For the main stats, I should also mention that while she's operated by Cunard, she is owned by Carnival Corporation. So a distant cousin of the Costa Concordia, but operated much better. She was ordered November 6, 2000. Her builder, as I said, STX Europe Chantiers de l'Antique in Saint-Nazaire, France, with the yard number of G32. She was laid down in July 4th, 2002, launched March 21st, 2003, christened on January 8th, 2004 by Queen Elizabeth II, completed December 22nd, 2003, and her maiden voyage took place on January 12th, 2004. She's still in service today. We already went over the tonnage. She displaces 79,287 tons. Her length, 1,132 feet, or 345.03 meters, as we said. There's a beam of 134 feet 6 inches, or 41 meters at the water line. So down there somewhere. And 147.5 feet, or 45 meters extreme at the bridge wings. So the first measurement was around this, and then around this for the extreme. So that means that she's at her widest at the bridge wings, which does make sense since you would want to use the bridge wings to look all around the ship and have a clear view. Her height is 236.2 feet, 72 meters, from keel to the top of the funnel. So we go here. She has a draft of 33 feet, 10 inches, or 10.3 meters. She had 14 decks for the passenger and 18 decks total. She has 4 Wärtsilä power plants. It doesn't really complete that sentence, but it's 16V46C-CR for 4 times 16,800 kilowatts power, and 2 General Electric LM25500 Plus for 25,060 kilowatts each. For propulsion, she uses integrated electric propulsion, diesel generators, and gas turbines used to generate electricity to drive 4 Rolls-Royce Aston Mermaid propulsion units. Those are what you can see in the bottom here. And as you can see, they might look like they're on backwards, but this is on purpose. Engineers found that if propellers are pulling the ship through the water, it's more efficient and cleaner than if they're pushing. So if they were going by the traditional method of pushing, then the other end propellers would have more turbulence to deal with, which is considered dirty water. It would be harder for the propellers to work in that case. It's also interesting to note that the forward two pods on the real thing can turn. On this model, they're just glued in. They don't turn. I seem to have lost the propeller, but you get the idea. In addition, for additional maneuverability, there are maneuvering fan ports. See if I can find them for you. They are here. There's like 3 of them. It's not very visible in the paint. There, you can see them there, which gives the ship additional maneuverability for when it's turning. The QM2 doesn't generally need tugboats to maneuver in and out of port into its slipway, but the tugs are generally on hand anyway, and I bet the freighter that crashed into the bridge in Boston wished they had the tugs on hand, because it can't do the maneuverability the QM2 can. You also notice the bulbous bow, and that is quite large. This helps the ship run faster and more efficiently by breaking the tension of the water ahead of the ship, ahead of the actual bow, so that it's more efficient running. Though the length of the bulbous bow is also determined and set for the ship's cruising speed as ideal. So it doesn't run as efficiently slower or faster than the speed for which it is designed. Currently what naval architects are working on is a way to vary the length so that the ship will always be running as efficiently, as smoothly as it possibly can. So there are some interesting technologies at play here on the QM2. The last one I can point to is in the funnel, because you want the exhaust from the funnel to clear the entire ship so that it doesn't get to any of the passengers and disturb them or make them cough or anything. Way back, get the Great Eastern again. As you can see, these funnels are quite short. A common problem that they had was that the smoke would not clear the aft of the ship as she was steaming, and it would, let's put this lightly, disrupt the passengers if they were on deck. So they definitely did not want that, but that was the way that they could do it back then. On the QM2, given how tall the ship is, they had a limit to how tall they could build the funnel. You'll see if you look at pictures, the funnel on the QE2 was much larger by comparison to the rest of the ship. But the limit that they had to place for building designing the funnel on the QM2 was because that it had to clear the bridge to get in and out of port. So it couldn't be taller or it would start scraping the bridge at the least. And they have to be careful, of course, because at high tide, well, you don't want a collision that way either. So what they decided to do is, you see the cowling on either side of the funnel. So you have these sweeping up. So as the ship is underway, it would create a current in the air that would come and grab the exhaust, the smoke, from outside the funnel and help carrying it free and clear even of the stern of the ship. So this would only work while the ship is moving. I'm not sure what the minimum speed requirement for that would be, but it did work. And this ship has been in service a pretty long time, I would say. Anything? I stopped at the propulsion to explain it. So let's get this more into frame. That's better. It has a max speed of 30 knots, 56 kilometers per hour, or 35 miles per hour, and a service speed of 26 knots. Not really in as much of a hurry since she's the only one left. A capacity of 2,695 passengers after the 2016 refit. And as original, she had 2,620 passengers, the original design, and a crew of 1,253 officers and crew capacity. So that's almost 4,000 people as well. But the way the cabins are set out is a little bit different. Not sure if that's really germane to anything. And sometime I would like to go on the QM2. She had a refit recently as well to bring her back into code. There's really no sign that she's going to get out of service anytime soon. And she should last at least another 20 years, at which time I guess we'll see whether or not she's replaced by another ocean liner. I would say that they might become more popular as a slower, more leisurely alternative to airliners, because airliners don't have things like lounges or theaters. And the time you spend aboard ships like these is time spent in different entertainments and experiences. So I think it's definitely well worth it. Or at least that's my opinion. As someone who is and has become interested in ocean liners, mostly by exploring different wrecks online, mostly through the internet. One thing I'm not sure the camera is going to pick up is because this model is completely hollow. You can basically see through one side to the other, just through the windows. And I think that's pretty funny, considering everything that must be packed into the real ship. To be able to see through like that is pretty funny to me. So anyway, I did want to do something for the 112th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic, and I have gotten all these models. I do want to get more, but I don't know who makes affordable, fairly small classic models of these other ships, and I do want them to be fairly small because I do have very limited shelf space. That's an issue that has come up for me a number of times, and I really want to do my best, and yet I do love having these representations of these great ships and what they represent in innovation and technology, the spirit of humanity, seeing all these different kinds of challenges presented, say, by the Atlantic Ocean, and seeing how you can address them over time. It is very fascinating. So, and I'm fairly new in my interest in ocean liners. If you want more in-depth information about various ocean liners, the engineering and design aspects of it, and histories, I would again highly recommend that you check out Ocean Liner Designs channel. Mike Brady is extremely good at explaining things, and he does great videos. He also works with the team behind Titanic, Honor and Glory, and he's also working with a team to build a game. It is pretty much a game that will allow people to explore different lesser known crafts, not just ocean liners, but airships as well. And the game in question is called Grand Voyage, I just remembered. And they have samples of ships like Lacona and one of the R series airships that went down, unfortunately, in a great tragic accident. Airships really didn't take off because of their fragility. Yeah, they kind of combust under the wrong conditions, and the wrong conditions happen quite frequently. But in any case, I think that's where I wanted to take this stream for today. Those were all of my plastic models that I have currently. As I said, I would like to get more. Like I said, the Kaiser Wilhelm de Gross would be great as a model. I also want the Adriatic, the Carmania for the early ones. Aquitania is also one that I would want to get. Vaterland specifically, in its original colors. And what else? I was thinking of some others. I think I mostly covered most of the ones that had celebrated full careers. I wanted to avoid more of the ones that ended in tragedy, unless they had unique designs to them, like the Normandy does. And I got all three of the Olympic classes because of how different they are, although I wish I had the Olympic in its later configuration because it has more lifeboats and it's changed to reflect the successes that Titanic carried. Should I go over very shortly why the Titanic sank? I guess I could. Like I said before, there were many factors that led to Titanic sinking. One of them was the delay in her launch because of the accidents that happened to Olympic and the need to repair the Olympic to send it back into service. So that delayed Titanic's launch, and the delay meant that the ice field had drifted further south than it would have been. The second was that company policy was to go through at speed. So that's why they were going as fast as they were. As to the claim that they were trying to break a record, no. The Olympic class was never built to break any speeds. The only records that they could have broken was personal for RMS Titanic, and any records for the class itself would have already been taken by RMS Olympic, which had been steaming for more or less 8 months before Titanic was launched. So, and by Captain E.J. Smith, who was captain of the Olympic before being transferred to Titanic as sort of an honorable post, it was supposed to be, before his retirement. But that is a flag. That's a heck of a flag. So that's why she was going through at speed. They did not necessarily know that they were going through an ice field at the time. This is because Harold and Bride, who I mentioned before, they were from the Marconi Wireless Company. They were on contract to the Titanic, but they were not part of the Titanic crew. Being on contract meant that they had different priorities, and the priorities were that once they did the repairs to the wireless set on the Titanic, because it had gone down for a while, they had to catch up to the backlog of messages between passengers and their families. And they had a big backlog, big enough that Harold and Bride got upset at other operators who were reporting different things in, and they basically told the other operators, especially of the SS Californian, which was close by, to shut up so they could concentrate on their work, basically. And between being told to shut up and the fact that the Californian had stopped for the night because she was surrounded by ice, so proceeding was dangerous, the wireless operator aboard decided to turn in for the night, so he did. And after that point was when Titanic crew started to, well, that's when Harold and Bride, after the collision, they started sending out their distress signals, but Californian's wireless was off, so they couldn't receive it. The shame of it being that the Californian was so close that passengers on the Titanic could see her lights. And the captain tried to get clarification on what was going on in the Titanic through light signals, but by the time that they were able to do that, the crew on the Titanic had other issues, concerns that they had to focus on, such as getting as many passengers as they possibly could to the lifeboats for evacuation. What else was there? And by the way, there were rumors that Harlan Wolff had skimped on some of the materials for the ship, or that there was a coal fire that weakened the area of the hull where it was struck. These are false, patently false. Harlan Wolff and White Star had a very good relationship because Harlan and Wolff had been building ships for them for many, many years, and Ismay basically gave them a blank check with which to use whatever they wanted to, whatever they needed to build these ships. These were going to be the 3 ships that would be doing a continuous service over a long period of time for White Star. They would bring in lots of money, and they would raise the reputation of the company so much they would be the stars of the sea. And so Ismay had a lot invested in their success. They had to be successful, they had to be good, they had to be able to hold up. So it was carte blanche, blank check for Harlan Wolff to build. And even though analysis now says that the hull was brittle, that was the standard for the time. So, the standard had to be moved. And the same is true for the British Board of Trade Regulations on things like the number of lifeboats, which were simply not keeping up with the gross tonnage, with the size of the ships, the sheer size of these things. And so the minimum requirements were for a 14,000 ton ship, as opposed to what the Titanic was, which is much, much greater, or even further beyond that. So, of course, there weren't enough lifeboats aboard for every passenger and crew. Although, as Harlan Wolff designed and originally built it, there were definitely more lifeboats, but these were removed to clear sightlines for first-class passengers on the promenade deck, unfortunately. As was the case with the watertight bulkheads, they were lowered so that the interiors of the ship wouldn't be as much of a maze for passengers and crew to navigate. And even a lot of the crew were new to the ship at the time. They were hired from off the streets to fill out what was needed in order to have the ship able to steam on schedule. In addition, coal and passengers were diverted from other ships to Titanic so that she would sail about half full instead of not really having a lot. And she sailed with more than enough coal during the coal shortage. And as to the supposed coal fire weakening the hull, yes, there was a coal fire that happened aboard, and these were fairly common at the time. No, it did not take place in the same place that they thought it did. The smudge that shows up in photographs of the Titanic sometimes could have been a reflection of the dock that was nearby, and it was too high and too far back, and nowhere near where the impact was. So that's also out. And there were rumors that when Olympic came in to repair, the ships were switched in order to make an insurance scan happen, and that after the switch, the ship was overinsured so that there would be a huge windfall for White Star. That wouldn't have happened either. Besides the amount of money invested already in these ships and the time and effort it would take to replace the parts in such a way that no one would be able to tell the difference between Titanic and Olympic, given their physical differences, given that every part was stamped with the hull number for the ships. Again, hull number 400 for Olympic, hull number 401 for Titanic, which means that because of the accidents that happened to the Olympic had at least 3 different kinds of parts that were stamped 401, right? At least for a time. You had the propeller shaft, the hull platings, and the propellers that to replace the ones that were thrown earlier. But these probably weren't carried through the entire career of the ship. They were probably replaced again with proper parts that were intended for Olympic herself during one of the refits, or one or more of the refits. And besides that, instead of over-insuring any of his ships, Ismay under-insured the ships. They were supposed to succeed. They were never supposed to sink. And so it's absurd to think that they would sink these $1 million ships for insurance money, and especially to endanger other people's lives in order to do that. Not to mention the hit that their reputation took as a result. Especially when White Star sold Titanic as nearly unsinkable, as far as it was humanly possible. They said in their advertisements, these ships are unsinkable. Where did the claims that it was unsinkable, period, come from? They came from the Captain Smith and Thomas Andrews insisting to passengers on the voyage that she would not sink before the collision, and then she sunk. But not without efforts to make it so that she stayed afloat for as long as possible. The crews who did this, they were heroes, and pretty much all of them went down with the ship. And Ismay only got on the lifeboats at the insistence of the other crew who were around, and because there was room. It is unfortunate that they did not load the boats as much as they possibly could, but passengers did not feel safe with lifeboats at the time. There was another ship, the Cullen, that got caught in a storm. The captain was convinced she was going to go down, and he ordered the lifeboats loaded. But because of the storm, the lifeboats that went away, they capsized or broke apart. And the heavily clothed passengers, because they were wearing their full dresses and suits and whatnot, they drowned, apart from one of the crew members who managed to climb back up onto the ship, which meant that they were safer on the ship than in the lifeboat, and the ship managed to stay together for long enough that they were able to evacuate after the storm passed, meaning that the lifeboats were more dangerous than the ship itself. Remembering that, the crew of the passengers on the Titanic did not want to go aboard the lifeboats. They had to be convinced that it was safer there. And why was it safer? Because the ocean was completely calm. And this was both a lucky and unlucky thing. One of the reasons why the Titanic hit the iceberg, that it took so long to even spot it, was that calm of the ocean. It was also a moonless night, so the only way they spotted the iceberg was that they saw this area of black against the stars in the sky. That was it. There was no clear outline for it. There was no froth from the water against the iceberg, or they would have spotted it sooner. Would they have spotted it with something like a headlight? Probably sure. They were aimed right at the iceberg, but they didn't, and they had about 40 seconds to either stop or go around, and Murdoch ordered them to try to go around the iceberg. It said that the ship could have survived if they did a head-on collision because the bows of these ships are designed to accordion in, and you can't flood what's not there anymore. But this would necessitate giving an order that would have killed a portion of the crew who were in the bow at the time. And there is no commanding officer who would give such an order. That aside, if it was possible to survive a head-on collision, there's a high chance of that, and they said that in the investigations afterwards, the inquiries. There's also a chance that the impact would have popped rivets and caused other breaches in the hull due to the speed that Titanic was traveling at. But scholars are currently leaning more towards that it would have survived. But again, that's not an order that a commanding officer would have given, at the time at least. Who knows now, but probably not even now. So, passengers did not see the lifeboats as safe, even though they were the safest place to be as the ship was going down. The engineers kept the electricity running for as long as they possibly could. Phillips and Bride kept the wireless sounding for as long as they could. And one of them was so focused on it, another person just stole the life vest off his back, or tried to. The other operator fended off this other guy. What else to talk about there? There was a time when Smith and Murdoch tried to call back some of the lifeboats to try to get them more properly loaded, but the lifeboats did not come back. Those aboard were afraid that the suction of the ship would drag them under, so they didn't want to be nearby when that happened. And there's also Violet Jessup. She was, I think, a steward aboard, and she was aboard the Olympic when it had its collision with HMS Hawk. She was aboard Titanic. She was aboard Britannic when it struck the mine. She was extremely lucky to have survived all three. But, she wanted to do her thing, so even as a nurse aboard Britannic, she was still trying to serve, still trying to do something extremely brave, and she did. And she was extremely lucky because she was in one of the two lifeboats that were an early launch from Britannic that got sucked into the propellers as the aft was coming up, and she had a concussion, but she still survived. The last thing is, again, I want to reiterate the danger that even the survivors were at. It was 3 hours after Titanic had her final plunge that Carpathia arrived and started to be able to bring on passengers. Carpathia, again, she was steaming beyond her full speed. Anything that might have been recommended, about 20 knots, I think, which is way over her maximum. And it's a good thing she did, because otherwise I think more people would have died to exposure to the cold. So Captain Rostrom and his crew are great. great heroes and should always be remembered as such. Uh, they operated in such a way that they didn't exactly tell their passengers what was going on, and the passengers thought that it was Titanic who was rescuing them until later on. And once he was aboard Carpathia, Ismay, I think he ordered the Celtic to meet them in New York to take him and the passengers back to Southampton for the inquiry he was sure would happen there. He did not know that there would be an inquiry as well in the United States, in America, which is why he went to leave that early. And he wanted to be sure that it was another White Star ship that took the passengers back, which is why he did that. So it was a whole bunch of stuff that led to Titanic sinking, that tragedy. And Titanic sinking led to a whole bunch of things in and of itself. A revision of the lifeboats, the number of lifeboats, the way davits work, and maybe a bit of hull design on the outside, but they wanted to make sure that when they lowered the lifeboats, it wouldn't catch on the hull. It's extremely important. They also started using double-sided hulls all the way around, not just at the bottom, more, so that any ship that got mixed up in a collision, side-on collision, at the waterline or below the waterline, like the Titanic did, should be able to survive that. If they had the double hull. Costa Concordia did not. It sank. There's also the International Ice Patrol, which ensures that the location of all icebergs and all ice fields are known at all times. And even then, when QM2 crosses, it often goes further south than Titanic did. So she would avoid even the chance of such a thing happening again, even though she could survive it. And by the way, QM2 has grounded and then been refloated and repaired after that. It was a result of kind of forgetting that when you're moving at speed and the bottom of the ocean is close to the hull, you tend to sink in more. I forget what that's called, but it's part of hydrodynamics. So they forgot that. They scraped, so they had to be refloated after that. So a whole bunch of revisions to the regulations makes it so that what happened to Titanic should absolutely not happen to any other ships. However, unfortunately, there have been a lot of really bad maritime disasters since, and if you're interested in such things, you should definitely look into them. Lusitania was also bad, but not quite as bad. There are the ferries MV Sewell. That's one of them. It's South Korean ferry. You have a cargo carrier called MV Vector, which collided with the Donna Paz, also a ferry, and was overloaded. It seems to happen a lot. And other such disasters, including the Costa Concordia, which definitely could have been worse. It would have been worse, say, if it had sunk in open ocean. So it's good that it didn't. But it also could have been much better if they hadn't been lax about procedures and all the rest. So, there's a lot that you can look into. Maritime disasters are going to continue to happen as long as people ply the seas, because people often just aren't as careful as they should be. And it's unfortunate when it happens, but it does happen. And unless people are extremely careful, they always follow procedure and they do the utmost to prevent tragedy, tragedy will occur. So you always have to be prepared. Murphy's Law, anything that can go wrong will go wrong, is not the motto of a pessimist, motto of a realist and someone who is always prepared. Titanic sank because no one could foresee so many breaches. You could survive 4 compartments being flooded, but not 5. It was the 5th that took her down. It was the incompleted, watertight compartments, and it was the lack of lifeboats as a result of not seeing lifeboats as completely safe and as seeing them more as a way of ferrying passengers from a sinking ship to one that's doing the rescue. That meant that there weren't enough. So a whole bunch of factors, a whole bunch of lessons, and hopefully you learned something. So I think that I will end it there. I'm happy that I was able to share my models. And I'm happy that I'm also able to share this interest. So I wonder if I can raid. I haven't done that in a while. Not many I follow are. And also, there's no one watching right now to be able to raid with. So I think that's fine. So thank you again for watching me in this stream, either live or as a VOD. If you like, you can check out my YouTube channel. Like, comment below what you think, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. I greatly appreciate it. You can also check out my Twitch. Drop me a follow. You'll get notifications same way. And of course, I will appreciate it. So thanks again for watching. Until the next stream, video, or whatever, please do stay safe. Stay excellent. But remember to be excellent to one another. Remember to be healthy. Your health is very important. And see you in the next one. Bye.